coming here. Just a minute.
Cool.
There we go.
Good afternoon, good afternoon, and good morning, team. Welcome to Flex Friday. This is the fourth installment. What started off as just kind of rough chewing the fat about what is going on in current events has grown into a movement here. And what we do is every Friday we have what's called Friday Flex, and we just kind of talk about current events that have just happened over the last week. In the past, Aaron and I, we talked with somebody, George, who was with us, and we talked about the Final Four. We talked about the NFL draft. But right now we have Braxton who's joining us. And I'm going to let him introduce himself. But right now we are under fire with the executive order of how it's going to change the landscape of NIL and the transfer portal. Aaron and I are co-founders of Blueprint to Bluechip, where we work with young athletes, which started off as a mentorship program to get young athletes from JV to varsity to Division I, II, or III, NAIA, and helping the college athletes transition to the pros, and then from the pros exiting out. So it's kind of been a three-headed monster for us. And the transfer portal and the NIL and this executive order has made it the fourth-headed monster. So Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to her. She's a co-founder, and most importantly, she's a mom.
I'm a mom. I'm a mom of two high school athletes. So this stuff really intrigues me, both in high school. So getting ready to explore the college landscape and what this means. One's a football player and one's a softball player. So yeah, I want to know how there's so many intricacies, and we're going to get into it. I think that there's so many misnomers, what's happening. So we decided we wanted to bring on the best of the best, who we just enjoy working with and align so much with our values, our character of having high integrity and really taking care of the athlete. So it's a pleasure to have Braxton join us to help us really explain this so everybody really understands kind of the landscape of sports, which I'm sure is going to evolve again at the collegiate level. So we might be doing more.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you all for that. My name is Braxton Wilks. I am an attorney by trade, and have started our own sports agency over the past year. So that has really, after 5 years practicing law, kind of made that shift. Followed y'all into the small business entrepreneurship route as well. And we have our own sports agency. We're based here in Austin, Texas. And just to your point, Aaron, the constant shifting college sports landscape is not going to just stop here. This kind of, and we'll talk about this more as we go through all of this and unpack all of this, but this kind of just shows that, hey, what we are at today is not going to be where we're at even 2-3 months from now, in terms of the landscape and the rules and all of that. So, but at least it looks like this will kind of give us a guide to what is going to change and what is to come. So I'm excited to go through this. I think, there's so much, like you said, misnomers out there, so many things that kids aren't sure about. So it's great to talk about the things that are going to happen, the things that may not, what this executive order means, what it can do, what it isn't doing, all of those things.
Awesome. Well, perfect. Let's dive right in and let's get into slide number one. Those of you out there watching us, you can follow along. Let's get into the executive order, and I'm going to turn it over to Braxton. But before we do, I'm going to do what everybody else across America is doing, and that is giving their opinion. Coaches, athletic directors, families, and athletes are talking about the executive order and how it's going to impact college sports. I think it's a great thing. I think it could be a hindrance on certain aspects, but let's get away from the opinion and let's get into the legal side of it. Braxton, I'm going to turn it over to you. What does this executive order mean and how is it going to impact college sports?
Yeah, no, the kind of meaning, I'll take that kind of twofold. So the meaning behind it, basically it's kind of the name of it kind of, I think, gives an idea of what it's supposed to do, or at least what it was intended to do. It's the urgent national action to save college sports. This was signed, as we know, by President Trump on April 3rd, 2026. And really it's directing the NCAA and federal agencies to have sweeping changes on athletic eligibility, transfers, the NIL revenue sharing market and restrictions on that, and then also restrictions and protections for non-revenue women's and Olympic sports. The way that this was tied, so I guess I'll back up a little bit and just explain. Executive orders obviously are the executive branch, the president telling the federal agencies, other executive actors, how he wants or how the administration wants to deal with certain topics. And then agencies are supposed to go through rulemaking, comment, all of that to enforce the administration's action and what they want to happen. That's why kind of in the legal side of it, that's why there are a lot of legal commentators out there that are speculating, one, it's going to face immediate legal challenges.
Sure.
It's not effective until August 1st, but it's essentially once that happens, it'll face immediate legal challenges. But kind of to your point, Thomas, the I guess enforcement mechanism of this executive order is tied to federal funding and grants.
Sure.
So if for ADs and university presidents who are seeing this, if they are not complying with the executive order, they might be losing federal funding. Again, legal commentators, and I tend to agree with them, say this will immediately face legal and multi-front legal challenges. So we will have a lot more litigation, and a lot of this won't be certain. But I think what it does do is give us a picture of what is to come in terms of what the administration is looking for in a congressional act, the priorities for college sports from the administration side. And so if we see something from Congress in the near future, it'll probably have all of these things. And then I guess to your second point, second question, what is the impact? And we'll unpack all of these, I think, individually as we go through it. But it's going to impact eligibility and transfers, kind of a big shift in how eligibility is going to work, how the transfer portal is going to work, the NIL and compensation. That one, to me, the way I read it, won't change much, but it'll also it will scare some people for sure, and it'll scare ADs and university presidents and all of those that rely on federal funding. It'll also scare some. It'll also deal with kind of the endless lawsuits that we see. I mean, I know I was following along yesterday with the Owen Heineke suit for an additional year of eligibility, and so that'll be a huge shift in that. But I think we can go through all of it kind of as we go through these slides and talk kind of each individual.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I love that. I've actually never had somebody explain to me, and it's been a while, like what an actual executive order is. I think some people think like, oh, it's a new law, like he signed it, and that's not it. It's not
right. Exactly. It's not, basically in our form of government, the legislature, Congress, and the House and the Senate, Congress sends a law to him. He signs it. That's a, new law, quote unquote. Executive orders kind of are almost guardrails, guidelines for what the administration wants. And with federal agencies, which are all executive agencies, it's essentially telling, hey, as president, these are my priorities. This is what I want y'all to do. This is my order, and executive agencies are supposed to follow that. So that kind of will have a big impact on how all federal agencies are looking at different rulings and different things with the NCAA and all of that in athletics. But it also is not necessarily law, like you were saying. So that's kind of why it's all still up in the air a little bit.
Right. Braxton, before we get into the transfer portal changes, the kind of the glue that keeps professional sports together is a CBA. Do you ever see that happening in the NCAA?
I think eventually that's going to be the way we have to move forward. I mean, that I think is the answer to a lot of all the antitrust problems would go away, all of that. It's just, I don't see it in the near future because for, the entire history of the NCAA, no one has wanted to acknowledge that athletes are employees of the university.
Right.
they're making money and until that acknowledgement comes out, that's the biggest legal hurdle we have.
Yeah.
There are definitely other legal hurdles in terms of just how a CBA comes into effect and who would be affected and all of that. And it's interesting not to talk too much because I know it has been talked about ad nauseum, but the House settlement, when you kind of look at the way that the NCAA v. House was settled, that case, it really looks kind of like a CBA.
Yeah. Right.
without collective bargaining.
Right.
And so that's one of the legal challenges that has faced and that continues to face. And we probably won't have any concrete answer to that for another couple of years.
Sure.
But I think all the legal commentators that I see that I truly respect who are looking at it have basically said, this is the answer. Us getting there will take time and will be hard, but the CBA is the answer.
Sure.
And so I think, 5 years from now, hopefully we're at a point where we're getting that. I would love it if it's sooner, but I'm not going to hold my breath on that happening anytime, in the near future, at least.
Sure. So let's jump into the transfer portal changes. And before we get into that, again, I'm going to always preface each slide with an opinion. When Braxton and I were playing, there was no transfer portal unless you wanted to sit for a year if you made a lateral move, or you could drop down to D2 and play immediately. That was part of the transfer requirements and rules. Last night we had our first episode of Path to the Pros, where we had 3 guys that all played at Vanderbilt that went on to the NFL. And what was really interesting is they cemented a legacy at Vanderbilt by playing all 4 or 5 years at Vanderbilt. And what we discuss and what Aaron and I talk about with our young families and athletes is how important it is to establish roots at a university. That these guys could always lean on the boosters and the alumni of Vanderbilt. Whereas if you're jumping around and you have no roots, then there really is no legacy for you. And once that money and the eligibility is up, these are the things you have to think about. But again, this is my opinion. Let's get into Braxton. He'll talk to you about transfer portal changes with the executive order.
Yeah. So one thing I kind of want to preface as well with the executive order, like I said, it directs executive agencies, federal agencies. It also directs the NCAA. The interesting thing about that is the NCAA legally, it's kind of the entity it is essentially a private voluntary association. So it really has no requirement like a federal agency would to follow the executive order. What's interesting, and we'll talk about this a little bit, is we are seeing the NCAA immediately react to this. So my thought is we probably had some either NCAA President Charlie Baker or some others that were talking to the administration about what they would like to see. And so they're it seems like immediately taking action on it. But specifically the transfer portal changes. So the executive order, one of the biggest changes would be limiting athletes to 5 years of eligibility. So
awesome.
right now our system for eligibility is essentially the rule is you have 5 years to play 4 years or 4 seasons, of competition. And how this would change is now we're going to an age-based eligibility system where you have 5 years after the earlier of high school graduation or your 19th birthday. So, and really how that affects the transfer portal is it would only allow you for one transfer to where you can be immediately eligible. And then if you are a grad transfer, if you have received your degree from your 4-year institution, you can also transfer and be immediately eligible. But it would take away a lot of the kind of people who have been able to transfer multiple times and play for 5, 6, 7 years. The question on whether or not this is going to be enforceable, because that truly, like the unlimited transfers that we have now essentially in NCAA is one of the kind of more clear-cut antitrust violations, and that's why we have unlimited transfers, where you can't go, if you're an athlete able to make money, you can't go somewhere else and be immediately eligible. So that would be one of the bigger changes, and probably it seems like one of the more likely, one of the ones that is from this executive order that is less likely to be actually like legally allowed unless Congress comes in. So that's kind of the big change. Instead of unlimited transfers, having a transfer portal, all of this, you would have basically one transfer in that 5-year period. The NCAA kind of has also, like I said, we had talked about the NCAA's response to this. They've had a few changes in response to the executive order, and kind of similar changes. One is they are now going to have enforce strict penalties on what they call ghost transfers. So, and this is something that was approved the other day and reinforced the other day at the NCAA Division I cabinet meeting. Basically, a ghost transfer, they say, is someone who is transferring to a school without entering the transfer portal. And I don't know if y'all have seen the penalties that they would be enforcing, but they're incredibly strict. I think first time you bring in someone that is a ghost transfer, the head coach is going to be suspended for half of the season, 50% of the season, and they are going to be fined. The university would be fined 20% of their annual athletic budget. So.
Wow.
And then, and the other kind of interesting part of that is it's all self-reported, self-imposed. So if the argument is, if Alabama football brings in someone this offseason who isn't in the portal, this summer comes in, isn't in the portal, and they do not report it, that would be a ghost transfer, and the penalties would be even stricter, where, you know, the head coach might be 75% of the season or the full season suspended, and 35% of the annual athletic budget is a fine or something. So they're trying to make a very strict system to prevent this. And when it comes to football, the really interesting thing is this has never been an issue. We always had, at least since we had the transfer portal, we had kind of one after the season, you know, early January, and then one after spring camp, spring ball. And so kids could transfer, and you would always have people entering the portal to transfer. You would also have people who would, you know, graduate from a school, and then instead of entering the transfer portal, they don't have any tie to the previous school anymore, and they can go enroll wherever they want with eligibility. So there's a lot of question in the air about that, whether that's enforceable. But again, they're very strict penalties, and it's kind of scary to a lot of the coaches and ADs and university presidents.
Well, that's one way to get someone's attention, hit them in the pocketbook, right? That's
yes.
Well,
go ahead, Aaron.
Well, I just have a question about that, because I see a lot of like how these athletic departments are currently running. You know, some of them are in the negative. You know, I think Colorado was like negative $30 million. Like, whoa, like, hope I don't understand how any organization coming out of corporate America can be running a 30% deficit. And then they're like, let's go spend more money to get the next group of kids. And now you could have fines and penalties. Like, I mean, wow. Give me your thoughts on how does any of this correct, I think, some of this mismanagement that's going on within these athletic departments?
I think the ones that are going to be the sports and the coaches and the athletes that are going to be most negatively impacted by this are the non-revenue generating sports. Yeah. You know, the fact of the matter is women's college basketball, football, they all are the money makers for the universities, for the athletic departments, and the current system we're in, the current kind of momentum we have is more and more. I think I recently saw the men's basketball transfer portal, the NIL revenue share market is 65% higher than it was last year, based on some numbers from Evan Miyakawa. So, if you want to win at this level, at least the coaches and the athletic departments and all of that are seeing we have to spend money. So it's kind of the old adage, you have to spend money to make money.
Right.
And so I think the ones that are going to be negatively impacted by that are the non-revenue generating sports who, are going to become less and less likely to receive any of that NIL money, any chance to do that, because like you said, if you're already running at a deficit, you're only going to spend money on the kind of the profit machines, the revenue machines. And that's going to be the ones that have kind of so far driven all of the NIL market.
Okay, that's great. Well, go ladies, go perform well. Be like the girl at Texas in your hometown that got the $1.2 million contract from Nike. I can't remember her name. We just talked about her the other week, but yeah, that's the way to really get NIL, is that way.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's, how NIL was initially seen. Obviously it's become a little different than what I think we all originally thought it would be and all of that. But yeah, I think there's definitely a market out there. It may not be if you're in a non-revenue generating sport, it may not be the, athletic department having a revenue share agreement with you, but there are definitely going to be, private companies, public companies that want you to, market for them and advertise for them and things like that. And so I agree. I think that NIL market, third-party NIL market, I guess is what I'll say, is thriving and will continue to grow as sports become more and more popular.
Yep, awesome. Aaron, you were thinking of Tegan Caven or Kavan, the softball player.
Yeah.
And what, Aaron, you brought up this point that what's so great about women's athletics is these women are they're being paid for their performance and their productivity, whereas a lot of men are getting paid for potential. And sometimes that's kind of coming back to nip them in the butt a little bit. Let's talk about the effects of teams in recruiting. Braxton, what about roster management? What are the challenges there? And the recruiting strategies, how are they going to shift?
This is the hardest one to answer, I think, of all the slides we'll go through, because this one I think is the most in the air. The idea behind the kind of age-based 5 years from your high school graduation or your 19th birthday is that it would be easier for colleges, for coaches, for universities to manage a roster because it's more definite. Essentially, all of the waivers that we have right now for injuries or extenuating circumstances or anything like that would be going away. And the only, at least from the executive order, really the only waivers to the 5 years would be, pregnancy for women and military service.
Right.
But most of the waivers that we have now would go away. So the argument in favor of the executive order would be that down the road, it's going to be much more likely that we understand, hey, we have this guy for 5 years, and then once he's gone for good, and we see the turnover each year versus kids that have gotten 6 and 7 years. The problem is, I guess one of the problems and one of the reasons it's hard to answer this is, what is the effect then on current seniors, current kids that have played 4 years, but have are still under the age of 24. And so they have no eligibility left right now, but when this executive order takes effect August 1, do they all of a sudden have eligibility? And if the NCAA's response, would they also have eligibility? So I think that makes it interesting. The other effects on kind of roster management, recruiting strategy, I think it's just kind of the overarching thing we've seen lately, which is kind of twofold. One, especially in basketball, but basketball, football, even baseball, if you're getting, recruited and NIL money and all of that, most of these coaches want to see immediate impact on, the wins and losses and all of that from you. And if you're not immediately impacting the game, you might have to transfer and find somewhere else to play.
Right.
It's going to be interesting to see how that is affected. I think the ghost transfers part of the executive order, like we said, it may not be enforceable, but it's going to scare some people, and that might change and shift the narrative and all of that. But the argument in favor of the executive order and this new kind of rule would be that we know, hey, no matter if you get injured, if you have to take time off, whatever, you have 5 years to play. And once you hit age 24, you don't have any more eligibility, no matter what. And so that would, I guess, in the long run, be easier to manage a roster and all of that.
Okay.
I think that's fair. I mean, hold on a second. I'm sorry, Aaron. I think there's a linebacker at Montana that's on his 9th year, dealing with COVID and injuries. That is a man. I still tell the story that, my brothers played at San Diego State, and Matt was a true starting freshman at 19, and he played against BYU, which was then the WAC. The defensive end was 24 because he was on a Mormon mission. And Matt said, this guy should be playing on Sunday. And, but Matt had the attitude like, well, if I play against somebody better, it's going to make me better. It's an isolated incident because it was, Mormon mission, and we get that. But when you're talking about kids that are 24, 25, 26 years old playing against 19, 20-year-olds, especially in something like football, I mean, even basketball when it comes down to maturity. Aaron, were you going to add something?
Oh, I was going to ask, is BYU's in my backyard? So I was like, that's so funny. I was like, oh, how does that affect?
I think that normally it seems like I didn't see it in the EO. I may have missed it, but that will have to be a part of it as well as
Sure.
A religious mission, anything like that. But I agree. It's hard playing against. I mean, that's what Indiana did this past year. That was their kind of transfer portal strategy, was get grown men, and clearly it works. So I think that will help in the long run manage a roster, understand who's coming in, who's coming out, all of that. It also, from the NCAA's point of view, is much easier to defend on a legal standpoint against antitrust violations and all of that.
Sure.
Just like you can't, be 13 or 14 years old in Little League baseball.
Right.
There's all like age restrictions are kind of a much easier thing to defend in litigation. So I think that's why they've been pushing for this since the executive order came out.
Yeah. Well, to your point, when you brought up Indiana, I believe, and I mean, somebody could double check this, but from what I understand, the average age of the Indiana football player was 24-ish. And then last year's 25 roster of the Las Vegas Raiders was 23, right? So to your point, you're absolutely right. Let's get on to that next slide. Let's talk about the eligibility rules and caps. Let's talk about the maximum competition years. You talked a little bit about that. Red shirt limitations, career planning impact, and roster turnover strategy. What are your thoughts, Braxton?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about the maximum competition years will essentially be 5. You might get 5 seasons out of that. There are going to be people who are, at high school graduation are 18, and they're able to play from 18 until they're 23 and get 5 years of competition. But that's it. You get basically 5 years from either 19th birthday or high school graduation. So like we said, that's going to change some things. The kind of red shirt limitations, I've had a lot of people ask me, well, does that effectively get rid of red shirts? And I wouldn't say it gets rid of red shirts, but it effectively nullifies the reasoning behind it in terms of you might, have what we've traditionally called a red shirt year where you don't play your freshman year, you get bigger, stronger, all of that, but you red shirt, you're not going to be able to kind of bank a year at the end of your career because of that. Right. So it essentially just, hey, it might mean, teams that have bowl games or teams that, and I'm just thinking football, but teams that are kind of out of the college football playoff or NCAA March Madness or anything, start playing more freshmen early on. all of that stuff. But it effectively would kind of nullify the reason to give yourself a redshirt year, because 5 years is 5 years no matter what. It's all based on your age. The career planning impact, I think, is an interesting point about, and it's almost a reminder about, hey, sports is going to end no matter what.
Right.
Right now we're kind of we have situations where, and the kid that comes to mind, just because we're here in Austin, is Quinn Ewers, but where you're effectively debating for some kids whether or not to go play professionally or stay in college, and you could actually be taking a pay cut to go play professionally. And so kids are deciding back and forth, all of that. You have 5 years right now, and you still might have that question for the kids that can play professional ball, but you have 5 years, and whether or not you get to play a pro ball or not, like, it kind of is a reminder that, hey, we're going to have to hang up the cleats at some point.
Sure.
And I think that using that as a reminder for me and what I do can help, just because at 18 years old, it's hard to think about, hey, when I'm 60, where do I want to be? When I'm 40, where do I want to be? But kind of basing it on age is a good way to remind kids, hey, you get 5 years in college. Let's use that to the best of our abilities to prepare for long-term success, to prepare for the rest of your life, and to succeed whether or not it's in professional sports. And if you get to go on and you're Tom Brady and play for 20 years in the NFL, that's awesome. If 5 years in college sports is all you get, then let's make sure that when you're 24 years old and going into the workforce, you have some financial freedom and all of that. And kind of, we talked a little bit on that last point about roster turnover strategy. Because of the age-based system, it will kind of turn over a little more. We might be able to start seeing, and I've kind of been pushing this with some kids in some schools, be able to see some kids that are coming in revenue share sports, receive some NIL rev share money, but kind of be there for development for their first year or two. And that's been a big knock, is, hey, the roster turnover is crazy. Some teams have no people coming back from the year before, and there's no development anymore. And I think we might start seeing longer term approaches from these coaches, universities, ADs, all of that, and long-term approaches to develop kids over time until they can really make huge impacts on the court, on the field.
Sure. Well, I want to address the red shirt. You and I both know, all three of us know, injury is part of sports. So if you're lucky enough to start as a true freshman, and then inevitably you're going to get hurt, and to be able to use that redshirt year for rehab and recovery is awesome, right? To be able to come back. So you're right. I think too many people try to bank it at the end to use that as an extra year. So, again, we're talking about somebody who's 26, 27, if we just melt this out. Go ahead, Erin.
No, it's something interesting we've heard, because, obviously now sports has turned into such a huge revenue generator. You see all this, we're obviously talking about it today. And then you have parents with strategies now in youth sports to like hold their kids back so that
Right.
they're bigger, and so it's like that actually the age restriction should also help restrict this too a little bit, because it's like, you don't want your son to be now 19, almost probably turning 20, graduating from high school, because now it's going to impact his eligibility as a youth in college.
Correct. Yeah, I think it's a great point, because I don't see anyone talking about it, but it's going to impact high school sports too.
Yep.
And, even middle school sports, because holding your son back or your daughter back at 8th grade so that they have time to grow, or holding them back 2 years or something, could impact the amount of years they have in college, and how many years they're eligible. And to your point, Thomas, about injury, there's no medical waiver, in the executive order, and it doesn't look like, if it's age-based, and I hope that there's something for extreme circumstances where a kid has cancer and goes through treatment for 2 years, or something like that. But right now, there would be kind of no medical redshirt, at least under the current executive order. So I'm interested to see where they go with that.
No question. No question. All right, let's get into the long-term impact of college sports on the recruitment shifts, power dynamics, NIL evolution, and the financial restructuring. Braxton, it's all yours.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think the recruitment shifts early on there. Let's just, we live in a world that the NCAA adopts all of this, all of these changes. It survives litigation. And this is just the world we live in. I think long-term, it would be better as a recruit, and how colleges would like it better because they have an idea of who's going to be there for 4 or 5 years, and then they're moving on to the professional ranks, whether it's sports or otherwise. I think in the medium and short term there might be some growing pains in terms of if this is retroactive. There could be kids that didn't think they had eligibility left playing next year, things like that could take up roster spots for some of the new high school kids and all of that. I also think that the shift with the transfer portal and being limited to one transfer would probably, like we said, not survive legal challenge. But if somehow it does, if Congress enacts this or anything like that, it would impact high school recruiting, where you choose to go, all of that, because you're now limited again to one transfer. The power dynamics, I think it looks like the NCAA, even though they're under no obligation to do so, are kind of going full bore into adopting the executive order. We'll have new rules, I'm sure, by the next time the NCAA board and cabinet meet, I think is May 22nd. And would not surprise me if all of a sudden we have these new rules that are going to take effect just like the executive order on August 1st. That's going to shift. That's going to shift some things. Obviously, I think the courts, if I was going to look at who has the most power right now, the courts are still going to have the most power because they're going to have final say on a lot of this. But the ghost transfers, the 5-for-5 eligibility proposal, some of the kind of more immediate transfer or changes to when kids can sign with schools, when kids can make money outside of their sport and things like that. I think the power dynamic continues to shift more and more in favor of the athlete. This executive order is trying to kind of, I think, put the weight back in the NCAA and the university's standpoint. So it'll be interesting to watch how it all unfolds in the courts, because like I said, there's going to be litigation about it. Name, image, likeness. I know there's a lot of rules trying to prevent what is called fraudulent NIL schemes in the executive order. It's kind of hard, to your point about Tegan. Why am I blanking on her name? We just said it, at the University of Texas softball pitcher. But Nike, a company, was willing to pay her $1.2 million to be a Nike athlete. The NCAA, the executive order, like any of the agencies applying the executive order, are going to have a hard time arguing that some of these NIL deals that kids are getting are fraudulent. And so that's going to be something to watch. But I think that we'll continue to see, like I said, men's college basketball has gone up 65% over last year. And so until universities, and ADs and coaches say, hey, this is all we have for you, and this is all we can use, athletes are going to continue to make more and more money, which is great for the athlete. We just need to make sure that they're, thinking long term and have kind of success for their entire life in mind, rather than, I want to go buy that Lambo right now, which we would all like to have a Lamborghini, but nobody needs a Lamborghini.
Right.
I'd probably drive it real fast and then be like, okay, that was cool, I'm good.
And then kind of your last thing about financial restructuring. I think one of the things I was most excited for about all of this was just the protections for non-revenue generating women's and Olympic sports.
Sure.
If it becomes just about business, a lot of those sports go away because they don't make money, and they're not generating any revenue, but they're great sports, and kids that compete in them, are better for it. And so I think that no matter what happens, that needs to be something that is on the forefront of everyone's mind, is that these are not just, it's not just about the money and the bottom line. It is, even though it is professional sports, even though college sports is now professional because kids are making money, it is college athletics, and there's a lot of benefits to playing that, even if the sport doesn't make money.
Sure. The financial restructuring, I'm old enough to remember the 1984 Olympics where the men's gymnastics team were just dominant, and the majority of them were from UCLA, and there's so many sports that are four-year sports, right? We only see them at the Olympics. They don't generate a lot of money for the universities. But, we could take, for example, this is a rare exception where just the TV contract alone for Notre Dame football kind of finances their entire athletic department, right? But not everybody's in Notre Dame, right? So it's just like, and it's unfortunate because there's a lot of great athletes that are playing, they're participating in the not your power sports. So hopefully they'll be able to restructure that where all the athletic departments will reap the benefits, not just the power basketball and football.
Exactly. I agree.
All right, let's get on to the next slide. Legal sustainability and challenges. Wow, we could do a whole episode on this slide.
I talked a little bit about this the whole time. So, but I have some notes. I could go through all of the different ways this will be challenged. But because there's a lot, there's executive overreach, separation of powers. Spending clause. Obviously, this is kind of using federal funding. So if it's coercive, that actually could negate the impact of, or the ability for this to be utilized by the NCAA and federal agencies. Preemption of state law. One of the things that the executive order directed was attorneys general, or I guess the correct term is attorneys general, but the AG of each state to strike down state laws that conflict with this executive order.
Wow.
Some things that probably, like we said, will not survive legal challenge, but will be challenged. I think who's going to challenge is the bigger question. Is it going to be, coaches who bring in a kid and are all of a sudden suspended for 50% of the year?
Right.
Or a AD who loses 20% of his budget as a fine because a coach did that? Or is it going to be, the players themselves for saying, hey, now I can only transfer one time? What's going on? Is it going to be AGs who transfer or who challenge that specific portion where they're directed? So I think there's going to be a lot of challenge to this. I think overarching theme to understand about this executive order is while it's not necessarily the law of the land right now because it's an executive order, it shows what the administration wants and what the administration is pushing for. It shows what we're likely to see out of Congress, and it kind of gives us an idea of where the NCAA, where the Trump administration, where everyone is pushing college athletics to go. And, whether or not that is the way that ends up being college athletics going forward is anyone's guess, like Thomas started out by saying.
Well, I have a question, and this doesn't pertain per se to this executive order, but you've now seen states enact laws that kind of benefit their universities to give their universities a competitive advantage. So do you think there'll ever be, I guess, legislation? Because that's probably what you would need to help, I think, regulate that. Mississippi's like, we're going to waive taxes on your NIL. This, it's like, wow, we're getting really crazy. Really, I have to just say over college football. I mean, really is what it is. Like, yes, basketball, there's a lot of money, but this to me kind of boils down to we're willing to do whatever, and even have our states legislate in order to have a winning football team, whether it's University of Wisconsin or wherever.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons that the executive order had that AG kind of direction. Like I said, the problem is going to be whether or not that stands up to legal scrutiny. It kind of like the argument against it would be improper federal intrusion into contracts and education, which are generally a state regulated thing. But would not surprise me if we see Congress enact something similar to this that tries to have full NIL rules that apply to every state.
Sure.
And that would, whether or not that would become the overarching law of the land is a question, but that would be the push from Congress to do that and to kind of keep it on an even playing field. Because right now, if you're in California versus Texas, a $200,000 offer to play in California is not the same as a $200,000 to play in Texas, just because of state income tax and cost of living and all those things. So whether or not we'll ever have an even playing field, probably not, but they're definitely going to try.
No question. No question. Let's move on to the next slide. And that kind of wraps us up. This is awesome. Team, we appreciate you joining us for Friday Flex. And everything we talked about today is going to be entirely different on Monday. So I'm kidding. So we don't want it to go in vain. But what we do is we want to say a big thank you to Braxton for coming out. Braxton, where can people get a hold of you? And before you get into that, team, I want to share with you that how we met Braxton was basically cold outreach on LinkedIn. There are so many people that want to help you and assist you navigating this landscape of NIL and transfer portal. So take this opportunity to get a hold of Braxton's information and reach out to him because he's a resource, an encyclopedia resource, not just what he shared today, but how he can help you navigate and plan for the future. Braxton, where can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so people can find me on X, Twitter, Instagram, anything like that at Braxton L. Wilks is my handle. You can also find us, our agency at Perennial Sports Group on X, Instagram. We even have a TikTok and then LinkedIn as well. And then you can go to perennialsportsgroup.com. I'll also give out my just email. If you just have specific questions, whether you're looking for an agent or have legal questions or, hey, I'm not sure what this means in my contract that they're trying to get me to sign, you can find me at braxton@perennialsportsgroup.com. So that's my email as well. Feel free to, email me with questions if y'all want to talk more or anything. Like I said, I'm probably giving away too much business by doing that, but I really want to make sure that kids are understand what they are signing, understand what they what language means in their contracts and their rev share NIL agreements, and then want to make sure that they're properly planning for not just the next year in the short term, but hey, let's plan for the rest of your life. And if you make it to the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, whatever, that's awesome. But at some point, athletics ends, and NIL provides the opportunity for kids to make life-changing money.
Sure.
So let's make sure it actually changes their life.
Awesome. Aaron, any closing thoughts?
I will drop all of his information in the comments so everybody can find it in case you just didn't grab that, but it will be there as well. So thank you, Braxton. This was awesome. I learned a ton. So hopefully this was educational for everybody watching and the replay's available. Go back.
Yeah. Thank y'all for having me. And like Thomas said, when this changes on Monday, I'm happy to come back on and tell y'all how it changed.
Yeah. Team, this is Friday Flex, and we can't thank Braxton enough, and I cannot thank Aaron enough. This is only possible because of Aaron's hard work behind the scenes. So thank you, Aaron. Braxton, thank you for your insight and opinions as well as facts. Team, we'll see you next week on Friday Flex. Have a great weekend.